Hello, everyone, and welcome back for the final part of my Gucci series. I seriously can't believe I actually got here. I'm really, really, really proud of myself because this story has always overwhelmed me. But we've got a lot to cover today. So before we begin, I'm Lolly and I make videos about fashion designers and fashion houses. So if you like watching videos like this, I have a lot more just like it that you should definitely check out. And I'm working on more. It's a lot of fun. I promise. I am fun. When I'm not stressed out, I'm a lot of fun. Anyway, with that being said, welcome back to part 4. Let's get into this. So just a brief recap, we ended part 3 of this series discussing Gucci, Prada, and LVMH. In fall 1995, Gucci launched on the New York Stock Exchange, and everything was going great. That is until June of 1998, when Gucci was informed that Patrizio Bertelli, the husband of Miuccia Prada, had acquired a 9.5% stake in Gucci. And in order to understand why Patrizio Bertelli did this, we do have to go back a little bit. In 1984, Prada, who was primarily a luggage manufacturer, launched the first version of their now infamous nylon bags, and in the decade following, had managed to wedge a space for themselves in the fashion industry, transforming from a luggage manufacturer into a global fashion powerhouse. And for many years, they remained pretty much unrivaled in a space of their own. But with the financial disorder and chaos that Gucci had experienced in the last few years, Prada wasn't necessarily worried. Everyone pretty much thought Gucci was going to die off again. That is until Tom Ford brought Gucci out of its grave. And realizing it too late, Prada now had some very serious competition. Just like Gucci, Prada was now demanding exclusive contracts with suppliers to help ensure production capacity and to discourage fakes or copies. And Patrizio Bertelli, who has often been described as an explosive man, felt Gucci's encroachment into their space, and he simply didn't like it. So he went out of his way to criticize Gucci any chance he could. Over the years, he dismissed John Mello as arrogant, and he accused Tom Ford of copying their looks, which, to be fair, by this point, everyone was producing their own version of a nylon bag. But for some reason, Patrizio Bertelli focused all his attention on Gucci, who was now on the New York Stock Exchange. And here's the thing, Patrizio Bertelli had long admired the ever-expanding conglomerate LVMH, which is owned by Bernard Arnault. So wanting more power and to expand Prada's reach, Patrizio Bertelli decided the best way to do that was through acquisitions, just like Bernard Arnault had been doing throughout the 90s. So he invested in his biggest rival, Gucci. And while I think Patrizio Bertelli did this to become a bigger player in the fashion industry, I don't think the dude had any clue what he was doing. Because that same June of 1998, Domenico Desolé met up with Patrizio Bertelli for lunch, where he listened to Patrizio Bertelli describe the ways the two of them, Prada and Gucci, could exploit their company synergies. And Domenico Desolé tried to explain to him, "We can't make this pizza together. Patrizio, this is not my company. I have to talk to my board." And Bertelli thought that Domenico Desolé was joking. It almost seems like he didn't understand the concept of having a board of directors or having to get things approved through the board of directors. But either way, that meeting was going nowhere. And Domenico Desolé, who again is really just a finance man at heart, had bigger things to worry about than working with Prada, which will inevitably come back to bite him, but we'll get into that. Because at the time of Prada's purchase of Gucci, Domenico Desolé was preparing Gucci for what he knew was going to be the fall of the Japanese stock market. After a visit to Japan in early 1998, Domenico Desolé noticed that people weren't shopping like before, and he knew the market was going to crash before it even happened. So he planned ahead while most others didn't. And that included Patrizio Bertelli, who watched as his new investment into Gucci became seemingly worthless. And for a while, everything seemed to be chill. That is until a few months later, on January 5th, 1999, when Domenico Desolé received a phone call from one of his close friends, Yves Carcel, who also happened to be a close trusted aide to Bernard Arnault, who called to inform Domenico Desolé that LVMH had acquired a 5% stake in Gucci's common stock, and they were going to make an official statement that afternoon. Yves Carcel told Domenico Desolé that Bernard Arnault was so impressed by Gucci's success and accomplishments that he wanted to make a passive acquisition into Gucci with purely friendly intent. And now initially Domenico Desolé believed his friend. He believed that this was a passive investment, so he didn't do anything. But obviously knowing what we know now, there was nothing friendly nor passive about this.
In 1997, Gucci was a high-performance machine, but a financial crisis hit Asia, putting Gucci and the rest of the luxury goods market in peril.
Japan was the dominant force in the luxury market at the time. So when there was this crisis in Asia, the stock went down. And I think at that point was LVMH started purchasing shares of the company. That's really was my concern about the possibly be open to a takeover.
But before we get into all of this, I do want to give a brief introduction into Bernard Arnault. I do think that'll ultimately help us understand him as well as everything that we're about to get into. Bernard Arnault, who was born and raised in France, moved to the United States in 1981 to expand his family's real estate business. And it was working in the United States that had a profound impact on him. It gave him a new perspective, and it taught him a more passive-aggressive way of doing business. And after 3 years in the United States, Bernard Arnault returned to France and took a cool $15 million from his family's business and bought Boussac, a textile company that owned Christian Dior. After this, he would go on to acquire LVMH through his acquisition of Louis Vuitton, which lived under the single conglomerate LVMH. Within 10 years, he became an icon in the world of luxury goods, amassing Givenchy, Christian Lacroix, Dom Perignon, Sephora, and so many more.
We try to build a large business with our partners with one criteria, the best quality and the most elitist product in every line that we are selling throughout the world.
He is an icon to finance and investment bros, but the reality is that he was known for leaving trails of devastated families, smear campaigns, and forced retirements on his path to power. The public even named him the Terminator or the Wolf in Cashmere because his favorite and most famous way of overtaking a company was to do what is known as a creeping takeover, which is a process where one slowly buys up a stake in a company until they have enough stake to have a controlling vote, thus being able to make business decisions, and over time, garnering enough power and control that you can actually buy out the entire company very cheaply. And this was allowed. This was totally legal. So this is ultimately why Domenico Desolé was spooked by that phone call. With time, both Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford came to feel that Bernard Arnault was using his creeping takeover tactics on Gucci, and they weren't necessarily wrong. So after that phone call from Bernard Arnault's team, Domenico Desolé soon became worried, primarily because Gucci had just found its footing after years of turmoil and chaos, and Domenico Desolé wasn't interested in a buyout just yet. So he tried desperately to get a direct answer from Bernard Arnault about his true motives. But every time he called Bernard Arnault up, he was redirected to an assistant or aide who just kept reassuring him it was a passive investment, which Domenico Desolé wasn't buying, because he knew that years ago in 1994, when Investcorp was looking to sell Gucci, Bernard Arnault was one of the original prospective buyers, but he had turned down Investcorp's offer, calling Gucci worthless. He instead decided to focus his attention on Parisian brands. But in the 4 years since, Italian companies like Versace, Prada, Fendi, Moschino, and Gucci were on a meteoric rise. And because of this, Bernard Arnault began to see Italy as an open field for potential acquisitions. And Domenico Desolé wasn't going to sit by and let someone slowly creep their way into the business he had spent the last decade trying to keep alive. He knew this wasn't a passive investment. And of course it wasn't. But Bernard Arnault insisted, even after the whole ordeal, that his plan was never an attempt for an immediate takeover. His plan was to grab up large quantities of Gucci stock, enough to scare up any potential investors or buyers, and to put pressure on Domenico Desolé to grant LVMH several seats on the company's board of directors, with Bernard Arnault's team saying, "It would have been dangerous to take over Gucci. We had some doubts. We wondered whether this trend of profitability, which is wonderful for 3 years, would go on without any problems." Bernard Arnault and his team wanted to study Gucci in depth and reassess the situation in 3 to 5 years, saying by that point, then maybe we make a bid. And something we have to remember is that we know all of this information now because it's been told to us over the years. But Bernard Arnault wasn't articulating this information or his plan to Domenico Desolé or Gucci. He wasn't telling them anything. Every time Domenico Desolé called up LVMH, Bernard Arnault had his team reiterate that this was a passive investment, despite the fact that he was interested in buying up more shares of Gucci. And it got to the point where he was buying up Gucci shares under corporations owned by LVMH that were listed under different names. This is entirely weird behavior. It doesn't all make sense. And that is why Gucci lawyers weren't buying up any of this passive investment nonsense. So Domenico Desolé had the team look through Gucci's assets to find any potential safeguards in case they had to go into battle with LVMH. And that is how Gucci lawyers discovered secret clauses in Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé's contracts, golden parachute provisions that have come to be referred to as the human poison pill, or my favorite, the Dom Tom bomb, a provision of Gucci's most precious assets. This provision allowed Tom Ford to leave Gucci and cash in his considerable stock options if any single shareholder accumulated 35% of the company's stock. Tom Ford was also given the ability to follow Domenico Desolé if he were to leave Gucci, while Domenico Desolé's clauses were a bit more open to interpretation. But basically, they stated that he could resign if any single shareholder assumed effective control. This really was Gucci's only asset. They had nothing else in place to stop a potential takeover because of the way the company had been set up when Investcorp was looking to sell. There were no anti-takeover measures put in place. There were no rules or stipulations, just vibes and clauses put in Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford's contracts that gave them a bit of leverage. So Gucci really only had two options. They could negotiate with Bernard Arnault, which they will try to do, and the second was to find a white knight with whom they could partner up with. Again, something that they will try to do. This battle would mark a new frontier for Gucci, and everything that we are about to talk about happens throughout the entire month of January 1999. Just 1 month. And it's important to remember this because by February, Gucci and Bernard Arnault were at war, and by March, they were in court. So much is about to go down, and what I'm about to give y'all is a synopsis of that battle. So here we go. On January 6, 1999, Bernard Arnault announced that he had acquired a 5% stake in Gucci, and he had his trusted aide, Yves Carcel, who was also an old and close friend of Domenico Desolé's, give him the news.
I got a call from Yves Carcel, who's the CEO of Louis Vuitton, and he told me that LVMH has purchased 5% of the company. And at that time, if you went above the 5% threshold under the rule of the New York Stock Exchange, you had to go public with it. So that was really the beginning of the battle with LVMH.
And did he say something about how it was a friendly acquisition?
Yeah, he said it was very, very friendly. And he said, well, I know it's a hell of a reputation, so I'm not sure how friendly this is going to be.
And at first, Domenico Desolé naively believed his friend, who promised him that this was a passive investment. So Domenico Desolé didn't do anything, despite the fact that Tom Ford and Gucci lawyers were urging him otherwise. With Domenico Desolé later saying, "Tom says I'm too trusting." It's true. His team begged him to make a move, to talk to Patrizio Bertelli of Prada, who owned a 9.5% stake in Gucci, but he didn't listen. And this is where it came to bite him. Because on January 10th, Bernard Arnault had gone to Patrizio Bertelli and bought up his 9.5% stake in Gucci. And it was only after Domenico Desolé called up Patrizio Bertelli, pretending to know about the sale, that Patrizio Bertelli had admitted to it, which now made Bernard Arnault's stake in Gucci around 15%. And with that, Domenico Desolé put his team into action. Gucci lawyers called up LVMH bankers and warned them, saying this is an official message to stop now. But Bernard Arnault didn't stop there. Throughout a 12-day period, Domenico Desolé had called up around 9 fashion houses to see if any of them would be interested in buying out Gucci or buying a stake in Gucci, and every single one said no. And it actually got to the point where Domenico Desolé became convinced that LVMH knew his every move, because every time he called a fashion house, Bernard Arnault would announce another buyout of Gucci shares. And when Bernard Arnault was asked about this later, he simply smiled and said, "Through our bankers, we knew exactly what was going on. The people who refused him called us." And that's called being a stalker. And within 16 days from Bernard Arnault's first announcement of a 5% stake in Gucci, he had now managed to amass a 3.4% stake in Gucci, an investment that was estimated to have cost him around $1.44 billion, taking this from a passive investment into an almost controlling stake. On January 22nd, Bernard Arnault finally contacted Domenico Desolé to set up an official meeting, where he praised Domenico Desolé and reaffirmed his aide's message that his interest in Gucci wasn't hostile. And I do want to just pause for a second because I think this really shows that Bernard Arnault wasn't naive or making a passive investment. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't buying up a few shares here and there. He was buying up shares by the millions. He praised Gucci's management team and said it would be a disaster if Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford were to resign, because the last thing he wanted to do was to go to war with Gucci. He also boasted to Domenico Desolé about how well Gucci would do under LVMH control. As well, he wanted 3 seats on the board of directors. Domenico Desolé saw all of this as a conflict of interest and became enraged by Bernard Arnault's nonchalance and his cowardly yet demanding attitude. So Domenico Desolé asked Bernard Arnault to stop buying up Gucci stock and to just make a full and fair offer for the entire company, which Domenico Desolé would gladly consider. But Bernard Arnault refused. However, he was open to negotiations. And because Gucci had no anti-takeover measures in place, they would have to keep fighting back, because Bernard Arnault had no intentions of slowing down. By Domenico Desolé and Bernard Arnault's second meeting on January 27th, Domenico Desolé tried to offer up some goodwill. He gifted Bernard Arnault's wife a new Gucci bag and offered Bernard Arnault 2 seats on Gucci's board, if he reduced his shares to 20%. And Bernard Arnault agreed to consider this. But by their third meeting on February 8th, Bernard Arnault had rejected all of Gucci's ideas. He was said to be frustrated that their talks were going nowhere, and he wanted to amp up the pressure. So he wrote a letter to Domenico Desolé, formally notifying him that he planned to convene a shareholders meeting to nominate someone for membership on Gucci's board. And then he flat out threatened to sue Domenico Desolé and other members of the board if they didn't concede. This time, Domenico Desolé refused to stand by, with him saying, "It was almost dyslexic to me. I thought this was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But then he is famous for having no people skills whatsoever." So on February 10th, 1999, Bernard Arnault cited his rights as a shareholder and sent Gucci a letter requesting a shareholders meeting to appoint an LVMH representative to Gucci's board. And after threatening to sue Domenico Desolé and the entirety of the Gucci board, LVMH thought their message would have been well received, because they were proposing a representative with no ties to LVMH, and they were only asking for 1 seat and not 3. And I'm sorry, but this man was fully gaslighting everyone. He knew what he was doing. He threatened to sue Domenico Desolé and the entirety of the board, and then up and turned around and was like, well, I don't know why they would be upset. I mean, we're only asking for 1 seat and not 3. When, mind you, all Domenico Desolé kept asking this man was to make a full and fair bid for Gucci. That's all he ever asked. He didn't ask for anything else. He asked for him to make a bid on Gucci that he would consider, and Bernard Arnault refused him. By February 14th, Domenico Desolé became fully convinced that Bernard Arnault was never going to make a full and fair offer, so in a desperate attempt to buy time, he came up with one final solution, an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan that allows a company to create and distribute new shares to employees of the company. So Domenico Desolé decided that he was going to issue a block of new shares to dilute Bernard Arnault's stake and thereby neutralizing his voting power. But not wanting to play dirty, Domenico Desolé set one final offer to Bernard Arnault, which was a standstill agreement. This agreement, had Bernard Arnault accepted, would have prohibited Bernard Arnault from buying any more shares of Gucci, locking him in at 34.4%. Or he could make a full and fair offer for Gucci. And then 3 days later, on February 17th, Bernard Arnault finally responded. He simply put, no. And then he asked Domenico Desolé to provide him a valid reason for accepting this standstill agreement. And it's been reported that Domenico Desolé grew enraged by Bernard Arnault's blatantly arrogant response and disregard, that he told his team, he wants a reason, I'll give him a reason. And then the very next day, Gucci announced that they would be issuing an ESOP of 37 million new common shares to Gucci employees, taking Bernard Arnault's stake from 34.4% to 25.6%, thereby neutralizing Bernard Arnault's power. So after this ESOP was launched, Bernard Arnault and his team were said to be stunned by the news. And this is where I'm torn, because either Bernard Arnault, like I believe, was fully gaslighting them, or he's just genuinely stupid. Because it was said that Bernard Arnault couldn't fathom what had set Domenico Desolé off. But what do you mean you couldn't fathom what set him off when you've been acting stupid every time he tells you to make a full and fair bid for Gucci, or anytime he offers up an agreement and you turn him down and you ask for a reason? Obviously, you know the reason why he would want a standstill agreement, because he knows you want to take over that company. He knows you want to assume control of it and buy it out for cheap. Everybody knows what you're doing. Don't act stupid. You knew what set him off. You threatened to sue him and his entire board if they didn't concede to putting your people on the board of directors. Like, don't piss me off. But either way, Bernard Arnault's team tried to cite this ESOP as a violation of the New York Stock Exchange regulations that stated that no American company can issue new shares amounting to more than 20% of its capital. But here's the twist that LVMH and Bernard Arnault didn't know. That I don't understand how they didn't know, but Gucci's corporate headquarters weren't based in the United States. They were based in Amsterdam. So that rule that no American company can issue new shares amounting to more than 20% of its capital didn't apply to foreign countries, and Gucci was well within their rights. And then right after that announcement of the ESOP, Gucci then informed the SEC and the public of Gucci's Dom Tom Bomb clause. This clause made Gucci less attractive to prospective buyers, as Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé were Gucci's biggest assets. Losing them meant that that company was worthless. And when Bernard Arnault heard the news, he sued them. He tried to block the ESOP, and he accused Domenico Desolé and Gucci of dirty tricks. Which I mean, like, y'all are both playing dirty at this point. What do you mean? Like, you can't hate the players when you started the game. At best, he is a sore loser. So only a week after Gucci's ESOP announcement, an Amsterdam court froze LVMH's shares of Gucci, as well as the ESOP, ruling a ceasefire between the pair until March 19, 1999, when they would meet up in court to negotiate terms.
Now we're going to mix a little money with a lot of style. From January through June, two retail titans battle for control of fashion's biggest prize, the House of Gucci.
So that meant from February 24th to March 19th, both parties had time to prepare. And while Domenico Desolé was looking into viable paths forward, LVMH got dirty. They did everything they could during this time to create tension between Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford, which ultimately didn't work, but was still a crazy thing to do. Domenico Desolé wasn't worried about his connection with Tom Ford, but he did become paranoid about everything else, ordering regular sweeps of Gucci offices to ensure they weren't being recorded, which sounds ridiculous, but probably wasn't all that ridiculous, because during this ceasefire, Tom Ford called up Domenico Desolé to inform him that there was a man who had been following him around town. Tom Ford had noticed that this man was following him to his office, to restaurants, to meeting, and every night he would sleep in his car outside of Tom Ford's apartment. And it has been verified that LVMH had hired a private detective to spy on him. Like he literally paid someone to stalk Tom Ford. Literally paid someone to stalk Tom Ford. What the fuck is wrong with this man? He has to be truly deranged. It couldn't be me. I am not the one. Oh my God. And throughout the active stalking, Bernard Arnault repeatedly reached out to Tom Ford to talk, in the most insane ways possible, with Tom Ford saying, "It was a transparent attempt to woo me. You know, Bernard Arnault actually met with my friends in New York. One of them came to Milan just to say hi. Halfway through dinner, she says that she's really there on behalf of Bernard Arnault, and she was supposed to call him after dinner. He's approached through every channel except the right one, the direct one. And this is completely unhinged behavior." But eventually, Tom Ford would agree to meet up with Bernard Arnault. However, on the day of that supposed meeting, newspaper headlines read of a potential meeting between Tom Ford and LVMH. As well, they leaked information of Tom Ford's personal stock option information with Gucci. Tom Ford immediately canceled that meeting, and he blamed Bernard Arnault outright and publicly for the leak, because Bernard Arnault and his team were the only other people outside of Gucci that had the full information on his contracts. And he also figured that Bernard Arnault leaked that information to potentially cause a rift between Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé, but neither were worried. They called Bernard Arnault's attempt a bad plan that was never going to work, as neither would ever betray the other. So while all of this was going on, Domenico Desolé focused his time and attention on finding a white knight who could come on as a partner and hold off LVMH's advances. And to be honest, it wasn't looking good until by a stroke of luck, it happened, in the form of Francois Pinault. Francois Pinault was one of the richest men in France, having transformed his family's business into Europe's largest non-food retail group. Pinault Breton Redoute, which is now called Kering, was looking to get into the luxury goods market. And in March 1999, Pinault was chatting with his Morgan Stanley investment banker about potential acquisitions when his banker mentioned LVMH's potential takeover of Gucci. And when Pinault heard this, he booked a ticket to New York and asked for a meeting with Domenico Desolé. They would meet March 9th, and it was there that Domenico Desolé explained his vision for turning Gucci into a multi-brand company.
Francois was the most decisive man in the history of the universe. I talked to him for half an hour. I told my story and I explained why we want to defend against Arnault.
And just like Bernard Arnault, Francois Pinault wanted to amass an empire, and he saw Gucci as his opportunity, with Tom Ford saying Pinault's greatest asset was his arrogance. That was the key thing. He knew nothing. We didn't need his fashion expertise. We needed his money. The last thing I need is someone coming into my office giving me advice on what to do. I don't need that at this stage in my career, and neither does Domenico. That was the number one positive point to Pinault. I always go with my gut instinct. Besides, what other options do we have? What can I say? I'm a Virgo. On March 12th, Francois Pinault agreed to go into negotiations with Gucci on the condition that they come to an agreement by March 19th, the day court would resume negotiations between Gucci and LVMH. If Gucci and Pinault couldn't reach an agreement in 7 days, there would be no deal. So that evening on March 12th, lawyers and bankers from both sides arrived and got right to work. And it was during their negotiations that Pinault informed Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé that he wanted to buy Sanofi Butte, which owned Yves Saint Laurent and their fragrance company. Pinault wanted to know that if he bought it, would they be interested in running it? And they were. When Tom Ford heard this news, he was over the moon. For him, YSL was number one. He personally had looked up to YSL in the 70s as a source of inspiration for his own collections, and the thought that he could bring his ideas to YSL excited him. So Francois Pinault bought Sanofi Butte as well. Finally, in the early mornings of March 19th, Francois Pinault and Gucci had come to an agreement, and they quickly announced their shocking and unexpected new alliance to the public. Francois Pinault would invest $3 billion for a 42% stake in Gucci, in addition to turning over Sanofi Butte, which he bought for $1 billion. This agreement would make Arnault's shares 21%, thereby nullifying his power. Francois Pinault would also agree to a standstill agreement, never to exceed his 42% stake in Gucci. And then 2 hours after this announcement, Gucci lawyers would meet up with LVMH executives in court, where they refused to give Bernard Arnault's team any further information about their deal with Francois Pinault. With the LVMH team telling them to have a successful meeting, 3 things are required: courtesy, transparency, and politeness. I regret that this morning you have showed us none of these. And with that, they left the meeting. That same evening, Bernard Arnault met with his team and announced his plan to make an outright bid for Gucci. Ooh, this is what really gets me, because just the day prior, on March 18th, the day before they were set to go in court and meet up with Gucci lawyers and negotiate, Bernard Arnault had informed his team that he had no intentions of ever making a full bid for Gucci. So why, the very next day, did he announce a $8.67 billion offer for Gucci? And this is what I mean, because you're not stupid, but you're acting stupid. And that's what gets me. That's what really bugs me. March 18th, he's telling his whole team he's not going to make a bid for Gucci. No intentions of ever making a bid for Gucci. And now all of a sudden you're changing your tune because you heard of another offer that just took place. So he made this $8.67 billion offer for Gucci, and then he filed a suit against Gucci's agreement with Pinault, claiming that agreement doomed his own potential bid for Gucci. But the Gucci team didn't believe his offer was real. They felt that Bernard Arnault was playing another trick on them. They felt that he made this bid so that he could get Gucci's agreement with Francois Pinault declared void. And then he could go on to gain effective control of Gucci for far less money. And this fight did end up actually going to court, where Bernard Arnault's lawyers actually argued that Bernard Arnault was a kinder, gentler CEO who would never lay off Gucci employees, which, if you take a look at his track record, was a total lie. This was the same man who had bought a majority stake in Boussac. And you remember Boussac? It was the first company he had ever bought. It owned Christian Dior. But he didn't actually buy the whole company. He bought a majority stake in it. The government owned the other half of the company. And this is because Christian Dior meant so much to the French. It meant so much to that country that the government had the other half of it to safeguard that company, to safeguard the employees, and to keep it alive. So the government actually gave Bernard Arnault the other half of the company after he promised to safeguard the company's payroll. However, he ended up laying off 8,000 of their workers within 5 years, and his actions were so bad that the government took him to court and made him repay $60 million. There is nothing kind nor gentle about this man. But despite Bernard Arnault's bid for Gucci, the offer didn't actually go anywhere, as it was contingent on the abolition of the Gucci-Pinot agreement. And that agreement had already been finalized, as money had been exchanged. So Bernard Arnault then tried to attack the Gucci-Pinot agreement and the acquisition of YSL through Sanofi Butte. He argued that Pinot and Gucci failed to pay their corporate taxes, and then, as a Gucci shareholder with 21% stake, he argued that the price Pinot paid for Sanofi Butte was too expensive. As a shareholder, he could threaten the transaction if he could prove that the investment wasn't in the interest of its shareholders. But none of these arguments worked, and thus the battle was over. Gucci was safe. In the decades following, Bernard Arnault would be asked how his plan to overtake Gucci went wrong. And he would say, "I wish I understood it myself. I should maybe have tried to analyze Désolé more. Maybe." His attorney said, "No, I think we were a little naive." And here's the thing. I don't care about these companies at all. I've got no money in the game, no skin in the game. But can I just say, what a loser. He wasn't naive. He knew what he was doing. He was doing what he had always done. And he thought this time would be no different. Except this time, he had lost. He had embarrassed himself. And he has since tried to skew perspective in his favor. But Bernard Arnault was not a naive little man. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to protect my peace. Ooh, I'm irritated. Gucci's acquisition of YSL was announced November 1999 and was an airtight contract through 2006, which gave Pierre Berg, co-founder of YSL, veto power over creative decisions taken at the house. There would be a formal separation between the Haute Couture line, which was going to be designed by Yves himself, and the Rive Gauche line, which made up women's wear and menswear and would be run entirely by Gucci. So in January 2000, Tom Ford was appointed creative director of YSL, and everyone wondered, would Tom Ford bring in someone to design the collections, or would he design them himself? And if so, would he continue designing at Gucci? And he ended up actually doing both. And I've gone back and forth on if I should include any of his time at YSL here, and I don't think for the most part, just to save on time, but there is something about his time at YSL I did want to bring up, and that is surrounding Tom Ford's first YSL collection that was shown in October 2000, which was not well received by critics who said the looks related more to Gucci's sleek look than YSL's. It left many questioning if Tom Ford had what it took to design for two houses. And yes, the looks did look like they came from Gucci, and that's because they had. When Tom Ford went to YSL Studios ready to work, he found that all of the seamstresses and design staff had been relocated to the couture house. Yves had taken everyone with him, so Tom Ford had to use his Gucci staff to make that first collection, as he was low on time and had no other team.
It's so funny. I've been so quiet about this for so long, and I said it recently in an interview. Now everyone's picking up on this because I don't like to say bad things about people. But no, Yves and Pierre were not supportive. They were at first, until I think the women that sat in the front rows of their shows were sitting in the front rows of my shows, and our sales were doubling and doubling and doubling each season. And then all of a sudden they became not supportive, and they were pretty difficult. But that's okay.
Well, you said evil, I think was the word.
I did say evil, and people keep bringing that up. And I don't mean they were evil people, but they're pretty evil to me. I've got a 4-page letter from Yves. I have 2 of them, handwritten. In one collection you have undone what 40 years of my life went to build. And, things like this. But that's okay. I think Yves was one of the great, great designers. I have tremendous respect.
Then tensions grew between Tom Ford and Yves himself, which were probably heightened because of Bernard Arnault. Because in January 2000, Yves would sit front row at John Galliano's Dior show, next to Bernard Arnault. and the pair spent their entire time wrapped up in conversation, part of which was recorded and aired publicly. The topic, of course, unknown, but it was said that you could hear Eve saying, "I suffer like a martyr, and it's terrible. It's terrible. Mr. Arnault, get me out of this scam." And it's so funny to me because here was Eve, a grown man, crying to one of the world's richest men who could have bought YSL at any point in time, but much like Gucci, he claimed they were too expensive. So maybe he shouldn't have been crying to a man who didn't want him. Why would you beg a man for anything? And you know what? I'm going to stop myself right there. I am going to stop myself right there. All I know is Bernard Arnault is yet again trying to flip the narrative, to come out looking like a hero. And I'm sure that people bought it. But Tom Ford would stay at YSL until 2004. And while he doesn't talk much about his time there, because of the way he was treated, his work there would eventually win over the public, who became quite passionate about his time and his work there. And Tom Ford was content as well. In early 2000, he and Domenico Desolé moved to expand Kering's luxury goods business. Their first bid was Fendi, the Rome accessories label that had risen to new heights with their baguette bag in 1997. They started negotiations, but when they got too high, Gucci made one final offer for $680 million. But Patrizio Bertelli of Gucci, a longtime patron of Fendi's, wasn't going to let his biggest rivals take over Fendi, so he offered $900 million, announcing that he was teaming up with LVMH in an alliance to beat out Gucci. What sore losers they are. Imagine how petty you have to be to team up with Prada to beat out two men who beat you publicly. It's sad. It's sad. And I should mention that Patrizio Bertelli's rivalry was one-sided. Gucci did not give a fuck about this man. After that alliance was announced, Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford cut their losses, and they came up with a new plan. That plan was to invest in fashion houses of young, prominent designers.
There was the agreement that we would run the company independently for 5 years, create these multi-brand companies, large group of companies, and then he would buy 100% of the share at the price that had been set forth at the time of the battle with LVMH. That was pretty brutal because we were under pressure to do it. Okay, so it was a lot of work. There were a lot of potential targets, and every time we tried to buy something, obviously LVMH would show up. It was not an easy thing to do. So everything had to be done in great secrecy. It was a huge amount of pressure because it was on one end running the company and on the other end acquiring all these companies. And we acquired a lot of companies very fast.
They would go on to have controlling stakes in Sergio Rossi, Bottega Veneta, Boucheron, Stella McCartney, and Alexander McQueen. And actually, that acquisition and the bitterness between them all makes sense if you know what happened between LVMH and Gucci prior to the acquisition of Alexander McQueen. And if that's something that you're interested in, I do talk a little bit about it in my video on Alexander McQueen that I can link for you here if you're interested. But this does conclude all the legal battles that Gucci was in. Thank God. There was no way to get around the turmoil, but now we get to talk about the fun stuff. So let's dive into some of Tom Ford's collections and everything that comes after, because there's a lot. By the 2000s, Tom Ford had absolutely established himself as a designer. His muses became women like Farrah Fawcett, Blondie, and Gwyneth Paltrow. He was making a movie star's wardrobe, and his catwalks were sizzling with glamorous models in python prints, leather pants, jersey dresses, leather jumpsuits, psychedelic prints, and strappy bathing suits. His women looked like they had stepped out of 1970s Hollywood. By 2002, he had developed his own take on the obi belt, which is a traditional Japanese belt. And by spring 2003, he was using subtle colors to create dresses that gathered and slipped off the body, and wove white and rose gold thread into fragile ribbons, and had Carmen Cass close the show in a dress made entirely out of these ribbons. But by this point in time, Tom Ford was personally struggling to amp up Gucci's allure without losing the love he had for designing. So in Tom Ford's fall 2004 collection, he took a look back at the glamour of superstars, the Gucci woman, who was the embodiment of sexual confidence and bursting with power, a figure of the past decade's highs. The show seemed to be a seductive tribute to his successes at Gucci, modernized blue velvet jackets from his '95 collection, a variation of his 1999 white knotted leather belted jacket with a white fox fur snaking around the shoulders. Tributes to Halston and Elsa Peretti, he had outdone himself with this collection that included slithering mermaid gowns in wicked shades of green, with matching fur trims that not only draped the shoulders, but the body as well. The show had ended on an emotional high. Beautiful, sultry, white cutout jersey dresses, a reprisal from his fall 1996 collection, that were just as hot as the originals. The show displayed his talents, his attention to detail, and just how far he had come as a designer in the last decade.
I thought the only thing I can say was Tom Ford for Gucci. I think the one and only. That was simply a spectacular show. I really believe it was one of the best I ever seen, and I've seen a lot of shows.
By spring 2003, Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé had been renegotiating their contracts with Gucci for the last 18 months, and they had hit a roadblock. Francois Pinault's son had taken over the negotiations, and it was said that he had a very rough tone. His central issue was Domenico Desolé and Tom Ford's autonomy. They were very attached to Gucci, which makes sense because they had fought for over a decade to save that company, and as long as they had operating autonomy, they would stay. But Pinault wanted to tighten the reins. One person said their meetings became torturous, as Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé were becoming psychologically intolerant to working under Kering. Another person said, both have an extraordinary ego, and I just never saw them working under Pinault, who has a very different concept on fashion and does not have a luxury-oriented vision of fashion. It was said that Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé were willing to take a pay cut to keep their autonomy, but Kering wanted full control, and that's when everything fell apart. So after Tom Ford's 2004 show, the pair announced their departure from Gucci.
Yeah, I was surprised because I honestly thought that what the two of them both brought to the Gucci group was so remarkable, and Tom is not someone, as we've seen, that's easily replaced.
What I hope people will remember me for is a designer who wanted people to celebrate life. We don't live very long. I think you should have a great time while you're on this earth, and all of us are spoiled because anyone who can consume or buy or even worry about fashion is in a great position already on this planet. But if you are in that position, don't feel guilty about it. We're material beings. We live in a material world. Enjoy it. Enjoy life. Make life what you want it to be. To do it. Live it now. And that's, to me, what fashion's about. It should be fun. It's about celebrating life. It was incredibly hard to leave Gucci for both me and for my business partner, Domenico Desolé, who is still my business partner, because we were lucky enough, because we were a public company, we took the company public, to operate as though it was our company, and it was. And we delivered very well for the shareholders, and we had complete autonomy. So I never thought I would leave Gucci. As a fashion designer, I was very satisfied because I was free to create what I felt was right. So it was quite devastating. It was very, very hard. I think anyone who has a career, not just a job, but something that you love, that you're passionate about, that you have put so much of yourself into, that when that disappears, you maybe don't know who you are. I didn't. It was, well, who am I? What is my identity? I had had such a great voice in contemporary culture. And if you're someone who likes to express themselves, that is very powerful and valuable. And I felt like I had no voice. I didn't know what I was, who I was supposed to be. I had no identity. And when you've also worked so hard, and you've worked and worked and worked and worked, and all of a sudden you have nothing to do.
So at the end, Tom was clear was not going to stay. And I worked with him so closely, it was just like my younger brother. So at the end, we felt, and I felt that we had done our part, and it was time to move on with life.
And I don't think I'm over-exaggerating or embellishing when I say that I think the world stood still, because everyone was in shock. Gucci employees were said to be completely taken aback by the news and saddened to have to continue working there without them. One employee said, "The mood in Florence was filled with an incredible sense of sadness." And now obviously Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé were upset as well. They had invested so much into Gucci. Time, energy, money. The stress alone of the last 10 years, I can't even imagine, 10 plus years, to walk away from all of that now at the height of their success, I think it's pretty impossible to imagine how hard that had to be. Tom Ford's Gucci era was an emotional one. From the first day he arrived, the battles never stopped, but he kept on with grace and elegance, as only Tom Ford can. His career at Gucci began in 1990, overseeing collections under Maurizio Gucci and Don Mello. In 1992, he was promoted to design director, and by 1993, Gucci was bleeding from every orifice. And by 1994, Tom Ford, then still a relatively unknown designer, had been appointed creative director and given free rein to create. By 1995, he had dug Gucci out of its grave, taking the archives filled with Hollywood stars like Jackie Kennedy and Grace Kelly, and emulating their old Hollywood glamour.
I always think you need to create an image where people stop and look at it. In those days, it was all about magazines and ad campaigns. And when your ad campaign came out, everyone really looked at it and took it apart. Today, I think really because of social media and the fact that everyone has a voice and everyone can be a critic, we've come to a point where it's often hard to be creative. It was so much easier in the 90s to be provocative in advertising.
He gained stardom and press for his wild marketing campaigns that involved sometimes promiscuous positions, like his fall 1997 ad campaign that implied a ménage à trois.
Interesting thing too is it left a double G tan line when you wore it, so you really were tattooed with a double G.
Or his 2003 ad campaign where he himself shaved a G into Carmen Cass's pubic hair. It was a humorous take on big branding, something everyone was doing. But Tom Ford wasn't big on gratuitous provocation. He was focused on sexual equality, creating a culture of equality, saying we live in a culture that objectifies women, but as soon as it's a man on show, there's a real phobia and everyone's outraged. Years before the world came to fully understand him, Tom Ford was already flipping the script, and by the time of his departure, he was working on around 16 collections a year. And then there's Domenico who had been at Gucci for decades trying to keep it alive. He worked with Paolo Gucci, Aldo Gucci, and Maurizio Gucci. He was in the infamous boardroom meeting. He was there when Paolo tried to sue Maurizio. He was there when Maurizio fled to Switzerland. He was there throughout the entire Investcorp debacle. And he listened to Maurizio's tales about finding money under the floorboards from his dead father's ghost. That man was there. He fought off Bernard Arnault from one of the world's biggest conglomerates and had won. Domenico and Tom Ford are the only reason Gucci is alive today. They had operated the company like it was their own, delivered on and worked with complete autonomy. They never thought that they would be leaving, and all of a sudden they were. It was absolutely devastating. By the time they took control in 1995, Gucci was bringing in around $500 million in the United States. By 1999, Gucci was valued at over $4 billion, and by the time of their departure, just 10 years later, Gucci was valued at $10 billion. After their departure, Tom Ford moved to LA to make movies and escape fashion, and for years, he suffered trying to unwrap his self-worth from that of his work at Gucci. He had put so much of himself into that work that he didn't know who he was without it. But he's Tom Ford, and he's one of my favorite designers. That man deserved justice. And as we move through the rest of this video, we will see other designers' work, and just how far Tom Ford's reach extends into the Gucci we know today. Francois Pinault and Kering can try all they want, but they will never escape the legacy that is Tom Ford and Domenico Desolé. Their departure left a giant hole to fill at Gucci. Many wondered what Gucci was going to do. Everyone knew they were going to struggle to find someone to match Tom Ford's success. And boy, did they struggle. At first, Gucci decided to split up women's wear, menswear, and accessories. They appointed Alessandro Facchinetti, Tom Ford's closest assistant, as creative director of women's wear, John Ray as creative director of menswear, and Frida Giannini as accessories director. And here's a short summary of that mess.
I mean, the biggest pressure that I had never had in my life, I think. But you know, when I start to do this collection, in a way, I try to don't think too much and just go on and be myself.
Facchinetti worked 2 seasons before Gucci let her go because they felt her work was a rendition of Tom Ford's work. John Ray lasted 4 seasons before being let go because he went in a more Scottish direction than an Italian one. His work read like an ode to Scotland. It was beautiful, but it had nothing to do with Gucci. And so after a while, Gucci decided to name Frida Giannini sole creative director of Gucci. She would work accessories, menswear, and women's wear. I guess they liked her vision or something. Frida Giannini originally came to Gucci in 2002 after 5 years at Fendi. Within 3 years, she was creative director of Gucci. Her interest or focus was the archives and La Dolce Vita. Her vision for Gucci was clearly rooted in the past. She believed it was her responsibility to stick to the roots of Gucci, who was not just an Italian company, but a Florentinian one. And I actually think I have a skirt from this collection, and it's cute, but it's nothing to obsess over or anything. And I think that's the thing about Giannini's work, is that it was cute. But, and again, it's just my opinion, that I think her work lacked that sultry and sexy glamour that Gucci was known for. And I don't think that I'm alone in this thought. A lot of critics hated her collections, but the public, the customers, ate it up. And this divide between the critics and the customers became a point of contention throughout Giannini's reign. Because the press and the fashion world didn't agree with her direction. They often called her a designer without a clear vision. But again, her customers loved her. Like, ate her up. And maybe it was because of the time period. I don't know. I was a kid in 2006. So I don't know. But what I think really helped her was that she started putting out so many collections that it drowned out all the bad. She brought in pre-fall and resort collections, adding to the growing list of shows and contributing to the pollution of fashion. Outside of Giannini, I think pre-fall and resort collections do nothing but contribute to the landfill and add unnecessary stress to a designer. But whatever. In regards to Giannini, with her being at the helm, Gucci was going in all kinds of directions. Every season was drastically different, trendy even. There was just no cohesive theme. You'll see. Her fall 2010 menswear collection was a nod to Gucci's equestrian history, full of horse bits, crocodile loafers, suede bags with brown webbing, and weekend bags with green and red webbing. It was heritage galore, all about La Dolce Vita and the gender fluidity of the 60s and 70s. Then she reissued modernized versions of bags, creating the Jackie with a floral print, and then she made her own version of the bamboo bag, making it slightly larger and with a detachable strap, that she called the new bamboo bag. Giannini became focused on the conscious woman, someone who could wear Gucci during the day and at night as well. She wanted to appeal to the everyday woman as opposed to the Carrie Bradshaws of the world. So her fall 2010 collection took a very obvious reference from Prada, with straight and sleek silhouettes and cutouts from the 90s. The looks could be worn to grab a coffee on the way to work, as well as at the club that same night. And yes, this sounds like a very good direction, making clothes for the everyday woman, because by the mid-2000s, the stock market was crashing, economic hardships were at an all-time high, so it made sense to start making clothes that could be worn in many situations. And just when Frida Giannini starts making sense, she veers right off track again. Because between 2011 and 2013, she just goes back to being trendy. And again, these aren't terrible collections, but she was following trends. She wasn't leading anything. In 2011, she referenced the ever so popular color blocking movement with fur coats, stoles, and wide brim hats. And it was beautiful. But it had already been done. Gucci was supposed to be an innovator, a leader, not a follower. Then in 2012, she was tasked with creating a collection to celebrate Gucci's 90th anniversary, which would follow the opening of the Gucci Museo in Italy, a permanent exhibit that would house Gucci's archives.
I'm always very fascinated by old objects and antique things in general. I love history, so that's an important point. When I joined Gucci in 2002, I was really in love with the idea of the archive and working with some pieces from the archive. I'm always curious to see when I touch a very small or very old object, something antique, something from 40s or 50s or 70s, and I immediately understand that I can work on this piece, how I can work on this piece.
With Frida Giannini in charge of the exhibits, she dedicated rooms to the history of Gucci, which included the Gucci Flora, the horsebit works of Aldo Gucci. She included work by Rodolfo and Maurizio, as well as red carpet looks that she had made. However, in a very bold and confrontational way, there was not a single mention of Tom Ford's work. By this time, he had been gone about 7 years, and there was not a single piece of his work on display. No GG monogramming, no obi belts or slinky dresses, or strikingly high heels. It was an obvious and total snub to one of the most celebrated designer turnarounds in fashion history. Both the press and the public were very aware of the situation, and everyone wondered why there was no dedication to Tom Ford. Now, Gucci would never publicly respond to this, but in 2016, Alessandro Michele would open up 2 rooms in the Gucci Museo for Tom Ford's work. And now we will get to Alessandro Michele, but let's run it back to Giannini and this 90th anniversary collection. A collection that was meant to honor Gucci's humble beginnings. And that is why it is so perplexing to me to see that her 2012 collection celebrated the Roaring 20s, which happened in America. Gucci, an Italian Florentine house, was celebrating the Roaring 20s that happened in America. She could have picked the naughty 90s of 1890s that happened in Italy, but Italy wasn't roaring in the 1920s. In fact, they were experiencing destruction and famine. Her big collection for Gucci's 90th anniversary was focused on the jazz revival movement and filled with androgynous flapper dresses with Art Deco designs. It looked like costume designs for the Great Gatsby movie.
That was a big statement about the Great Gatsby, wasn't it?
The pieces were a far cry from something you could wear to work or the club, because imagine showing up to the club in a flapper dress in May. Who was wearing a flapper dress outside of a performer and someone going to a Halloween party? And it's dumb. It's dumb. I'm sorry. Her unwearable clothing meant that her collections weren't creating ripples of influence anymore. Gucci was beginning to lose its edge and popularity. Profits were falling while their sister companies YSL, Bottega Veneta, and Alexander McQueen were seeing high profit margins. And that is when Giannini began to feel the pressure. And in a desperate attempt to turn things around, Giannini looked to China. She decided that she was going to show her spring 2013 collection there in hopes that it would spark popularity and press.
I never think when we start to design a collection, this is for an American woman or this is for a Chinese or a Japanese. To me, this is for the Gucci woman. Working for fashion today, for the fashion industry, that you really have to look to the entire world. So it's not anymore one country.
It was a 60s dream of bright pinks, cobalts, citrus yellow, orange, and coral, as well as turquoise dresses, trousers, and tunics, with heavy beading embellishments. And you can actually see this entire collection play out in a documentary that she released called The Director. It was made by James Franco, so I don't know. Different time, I don't know. I think the documentary is a good watch, primarily because it follows Giannini around as she discusses the Gucci Museo, and you can get a behind the scenes into not only the Museo, but her Roaring 20s collection, as well as her 2013 Shanghai, right? I think it's her Shanghai show. I know it's in China, I just don't remember what city, but I think it's Shanghai. It's been a very long time since I've seen that documentary, but as I recall it, it was a very odd watch. Even now, I feel the awkwardness and tension of that entire experience, mostly because it was all of her employees talking about her and how great she is as a director and a designer. And the only joy I found while watching it was trying to catch glimpses of a young Alessandro Michele working in the background and seeing just how much he visibly didn't want to be there. It's a very brutal and awkward documentary to watch. It's very tough, but the documentary also did touch on one very important topic, Frida Giannini's boyfriend. And now I'm not usually into digging through people's relationships, unless they're my friends, because I don't find it necessary, nor do I want to speculate about other people's lives. But in this case, Giannini's relationship is important to this story. If I were to not talk about it, a lot of the things that happen wouldn't make sense. So I am going to give a little summary of that relationship. Frida Giannini's relationship with Patrizio DeMarco, the then president, chairman, and CEO of Gucci, who she had quietly started dating in 2009, but hadn't reported to HR until 2012. And when Domenico Desolé was running Gucci, he actually didn't allow employees to date from within, as he felt it could potentially cause conflicts. But Gucci Group CEO Robert Paulet saw no issue with their relationship. However, many employees took issue with it. They felt they now had no one to turn to if they had a problem. That's because if they had a problem with Frida Giannini, they were supposed to report to DeMarco, and if they had an issue with DeMarco, they felt like they couldn't talk to Frida Giannini about it. And yes, they had already been secretly dating for 3 years by this point, but now that people knew that, it changed everything. People were concerned. They had complaints and viable worries that if one of them left, the other would follow suit. And that is exactly what happened. In December 2014, only a year and a half later, Patrizio DeMarco was let go. Gucci had ousted him as CEO because sales had been steadily declining and his design and branding strategy wasn't working. He was bitter, and he blamed his enemies at Gucci for his downfall. His strategy, much like his girlfriend Frida Giannini's, was to include less use of the GG logo. He also increased prices on accessories to make Gucci feel more expensive, which isn't unheard of. Chanel and Hermes have been doing it for years, and actually Chanel has been increasing prices, limiting product availability, and implementing rules to try and replicate the prestige of Hermes. But that's a side note. I'm just trying to say that a lot of companies do this. But in this case, Gucci was increasing prices and it wasn't working. People weren't buying it. Quarter to quarter, Gucci was experiencing decreased revenues, mixed reviews, and sluggish sales. So ultimately, they decided to let both of them go. However, Gucci was allowing Frida Giannini to complete her last 2 collections in January and February, but it was said that once they let Patrizio DeMarco go, tensions grew between Frida Giannini and Gucci's new CEO, Marco Bizzarri, as Frida Giannini refused to comply with Marco Bizzarri's vision for Gucci. And there are a few conflicting reports on if Frida Giannini walked out of Gucci or if Marco Bizzarri asked her to leave. But Frida Giannini would ultimately leave before finishing either of her 2 collections. Gucci was left again to find someone to complete the collections. They had already planned to find someone to replace her, but they didn't plan on her leaving so soon. They thought they had time. And her abrupt departure had rumors flying that Frida Giannini left over a dispute on who would take her place, as well as if Gucci would even be showing a collection so close to the day. But unbeknownst to everyone, Gucci had already taken a gamble from within. And then for the second time in Gucci's very long life, they turned to a then unknown designer who had been working in the background of Gucci. This time, it was Alessandro Michele, who had worked alongside Frida Giannini at Fendi before moving to Gucci together. He had been a part of the accessories department for 12 years, 3 of them as associate director. But after so much time, Michele, much like Tom Ford, was tired and drained. He was done, and he planned on leaving Gucci. And you can see that in the documentary as well. He felt no sense of freedom in his work. He wanted something new, but something made him stay. Some might call it fate, coincidence, or timing. Whichever you choose to believe, Alessandro Michele stayed. So let's talk about him.
Appena fatte Valentino quello. Le clutch di plexi. Hanno invitato tutte le modelle e tutti quanti con queste cose trasparenti con dentro La festa che hanno fatto a Parigi.
Sì, loro peggio.
No, ci sono molti di più. No, ragazzi, ho passato una serata intera.
Noi lavoravamo prima insieme da Fendi e poi sono venuto con le da Gucci. Diciamo, ho una visione di Frida proprio di una persona della mia vita, quindi tipo non so come dirti, è come se mi chiedessi dei pregi e difetti di mia sorella o se mia sorella, cioè quello che è, nel senso è così e quindi no? È difficile. Poi nel mondo invece, diciamo, catena di quel vintage, te l'avevamo già fatta vedere e l'abbiamo rimessa in pista con la nappa.
Per me continua ad essere di una tristezza.
Basta, non ci frega niente.
Poi vediamo un attimo sopra, ma subito signora mia. Non mi piace. Una borsa mia. L'ho già te l'ho detto l'altra volta, lo sappiamo noi che questa è una borsa dell'archivio,
No,
ma
è vero.
non la riconosce nessuno, cioè è inutile proprio metterla, sprecare una sfilata per una borsa così.
Ok. Poi
Non è moderna, non è ripensata in maniera moderna, è proprio quella lì, vecchietta era e vecchietta è rimasta. Poi, guarda, dietro non mi piace niente Francesca, quindi vai veloce perché, sì, questo è terrificante.
Esatto.
Sembra
perché ci si vede la colla purtroppo. Quella si vede la colla, tengono degli ideogrammi.
un telefonino dei Flintstones chic.
Però dice a sto punto teniamo quella lavorazione e via.
Questo è un profumo. Sì, most of the collaborators I have with me, they are working with me since more than 10 years, which I think is huge. They know what I hate. I know if I have to push them in a different direction. They know how they can convince me in doing something that usually I don't like to do, but I think it's good sometimes to be forced in doing something else because, of course, it's
Alessandro Michele was born in Rome in 1972. As he grew up, he studied at Rome's Accademia di Costume e di Moda, where he hoped to become a costume designer. However, at 22, he moved to Bologna to design knitwear for Les Compagnes, and then 3 years later, he headed to Fendi to work with Silvio Venturini Fendi, who had invented the Fendi baguette in 1997. That meant that he also worked with Karl Lagerfeld, who worked at Fendi during that time. But in 2002, he moved to Gucci, where he had been for the last decade. And Tom Ford said Alessandro Michele was one of the greatest handbag designers he had ever worked with. And within the confinements of Fendi and Gucci, Alessandro Michele was someone. Outside of that, no one knew who he was. But they were about to find out. With just 5 days until the menswear show in January, Alessandro Michele threw out Frida Giannini's entire collection, including the models and seating arrangement. See, under Frida Giannini, Alessandro Michele was loyal. He delivered what was asked of him. But no one had ever asked his opinion or let him create. And now, he could let his imagination run wild. His vision of Gucci was based on his eclectic and odd references. He took what everyone thought Gucci was, and he threw it out. He wanted to create a new story, a love affair between Gucci and Alessandro Michele. Much like Tom Ford before him, there was no big risk and zero stake in this collection. He really could do whatever he wanted. And that's because no one knew who he was. If the collection was bad, Gucci could cut him loose and move on. But if it succeeded, then Alessandro Michele would be their success story. And he really did follow his instinct. He dove into Gucci's extensive archives to see what codes and bags could aid his new vision. The jet-set social scene had taken off and landed somewhere else. In its place was Apollo and Venus, with gender-bending beauty. Alessandro Michele somehow got a collection together in 5 days' time. Starting at 9 a.m., he worked well until 8 p.m., when he switched to work with the women's wear team. He looked for inspiration everywhere, using 19th century rose-printed red cloth, which was said to be similar to the cloth used on the beds of his Boston Terriers. The show opened and closed with orchestral music from Tom Ford's latest film, A Single Man. Because for Alessandro Michele, Tom Ford was a huge point of reference. For Michele, Ford was the reason he was there, why Gucci had survived. With him saying, "My time with Ford was a beautiful experience," Tom has a quality like a movie star, and I loved his visitation of that beautiful Halston-style 70s American woman. Much like Ford and his sexual equality stance, Michele was looking to cause a revolution, to push a language and find a new way of talking about beauty and sensuality. So when he started thinking about his first collection, it had nothing to do with trends or a specific Gucci era, but instead, he wanted to exude a certain attitude, the attitude of his parents, who were very present in that collection. Michele's mother was first assistant at Rank Films, a British film company with studios in Italy. She was eccentric, known for her bold hairstyles and fashionable clothing. As a child, she told Michele all about her actor friends and stories about old Hollywood. While his father was a bit of a shaman with long hair and a beard, a man who could identify bird sounds and whistle them back, Michele's use of the flora and fauna in his collections was his way of weaving his father's life into his work. The collection was full of androgynous models with long hair, walking out in chic French pussy bow blouses, long-sleeve t-shirts with red lace, flooded jeans and cropped jackets, berets, horn-rimmed glasses, neck scarves, and rings galore. Models wore sandals, fur-trimmed loafers, clogs. The entire collection had a gender-fluid romanticism to it, because it was his way of telling the audience who he was. And when Michele walked out at the end of the show, no one knew who he was. They were too stunned to speak. This man had been a background player in the industry for 15 years, and that was the beauty of it all. This was the new Gucci, the Gucci everyone had been waiting for. In 2016, Harry Styles further boasted Michele's reputation when he wore a black and white floral Gucci suit from Michele's Spring 2016 collection. Many have claimed it to be his worst outfit, but I saw the vision. It was bold, and I believe it marked the beginning of their friendship, as Harry Styles would go on to become the face of Alessandro Michele's Gucci. Alessandro Michele was even his designer choice when Harry Styles co-hosted the Met Gala in 2019. And in 2020, Harry Styles would make headlines as the first man to ever wear a dress on the cover of Vogue, wearing a dress from Alessandro Michele's 2020 collection. And just as a side note, I hated that cover, primarily because he's wearing a giant blazer that covers most of the dress, which was a stupid styling choice, especially when you're trying to make the headline as the first man to ever wear a dress on the cover of Vogue. Be so freaking for real with me. Why are you wearing a giant blazer? But it's whatever. Alessandro Michele would even bring in other celebrities to endorse, like Tyler the Creator, my personal favorite, and Dakota Johnson. And again, I don't think I'm going to spend copious amounts of time discussing every single collection because there are just so many. I will, however, be giving some highlights as well as some of my personal favorites, so let's get into this. In his second collection that February, Michele was officially named creative director. That collection cemented his ideas from the menswear show with Princeton fur loafers and eloquent bags with animal prints, florals, and embroidery. His handbags, clothing, and accessories would introduce old Gucci motifs used by the family, like the bumblebee, the snake, the tiger, the butterfly, and the lion. The bumblebee is a sign of nobility in Europe. The king snake with its black, red, and white stripes symbolizes wisdom and knowledge, or a mixture of power, sensuality, and seduction. The tiger represents strength and bravery. The lion is authority and commands the epitome of strength, while the butterfly is a symbol of Gucci's past and present, which appeared in the original Gucci flora. Alessandro Michele did so much. He created custom pieces for Beyoncé's Formation tour. He also created the outfit Rihanna wore to Coachella from his Fall 2018 collection. He revamped the GG belt with rounded GGs and bubbled out letters. He updated and modernized the Soho bag, as well as the horsebit bag created in the 50s. As well, he created new bags, like the Marmont bag, a classic shoulder-flap bag, and the Dionysus, a double tiger head with a spur that sits front and center. Every creation was intended to last the decades to come. He also created Gucci logo t-shirts that every influencer and their mother wore, which were actually made as a part of a larger conversation. They were a commentary on Gucci's counterfeiting past, which we will talk about. Alessandro Michele was pushing the limits on conformity. He wasn't afraid to test boundaries. In his Spring 2018 collection, he reinterpreted classic paintings and dressed his subjects up in Gucci. It was dreamy and daring. And in his Fall 2018 collection, models wore horns, iguanas, and third eyes. Some carried baby dragons, and in other cases, their own heads. It was a metaphor for how we construct our identities today and how we expose, hide, and transform ourselves through technology, Instagram, fashion, and surgery. He hired models who didn't fit the standards of conventional beauty, and that became even more evident in his 2019 Gucci beauty campaign, where he showed models with dentures, straight teeth, gaps, and missing teeth. And in his Fall 2020 collection, he turned the traditional fashion show inside out, giving a behind-the-scenes look at how makeup artists and hairstylists work. The audience watched models get dolled up inside a Gucci carousel. Then in May 2020, after months in lockdown, Alessandro Michele announced a major change. The company would be slowing down to just 2 shows a year. His co-ed collections would come in a variety of formats, not excluding runway shows, but including photos, week-long film festivals, and films. Gone were gender barriers, gone were traditional catwalks, gone was the old Gucci under Giannini with all the clutter. Alessandro Michele had gone out of his way to understand how fashion impacts the environment and was showing the fashion world you can be cool and not have to use vegan leather. He made sustainability a priority at Gucci, eliminating fur in 2017, and in 2019, Gucci announced that by 2020, all events, including the construction of the invites, would be carbon neutral, which I highly doubt happened or is something that they're even continuing today. Whatever. I hate a liar. I really do. I'm moving on. I do want to get into some of the controversy surrounding Gucci because it's not something that we can ignore, and it is something that I do want to talk about. In Gucci's 2018 Cruise collection, Alessandro Michele copied Dapper Dan's mutton sleeve logo jacket that Diane Dixon, the original owner of the jacket, called them out for. Soon after, Gucci announced that they would be bringing Dapper Dan into the fold, and I can't for the life of me figure out if this jacket was their way of announcing Dapper Dan, or if they copied his work, realized they fucked up, and then brought him into the house. I don't know.
Okay, hold on. Now, let's talk about how this really went down. I went from refashioning fashion to have fashion refashion me. All of a sudden, one of my creations popped up on the Gucci runway. It was the same Diane Dixon look that I had did 30 years earlier. I was used to white folks taking stuff from us. That was a given, you know? But the new generation said, no, man, they wasn't having it. You know, internet, social media gave people of color a voice. So when people saw that coat that Gucci made, it was an uproar. Next thing I know, my son told me, they want to get in touch with you. They want to be in a partnership. So I told my son, I said, if they serious, I said, tell them to come to Harlem. And they came.
What I do know is that this jacket brought up the issue many fashion houses have, which is a lack of people of color when it comes to designers, seamstresses, marketing teams, PR teams, basically all levels of workers who could have spoken up and said something was wrong. This is a topic brought up time and time again throughout fashion, but I don't think it's any one person's responsibility to speak up and say something is wrong, especially not because of the color of their skin. We all just need a little bit more common sense. But I do want to talk about Dapper Dan. So, who is Dapper Dan? Dapper Dan is the original creator of this jacket. Dapper Dan, or Daniel Day, is a Harlem couturier known as the king of knockups, not knockoffs, because they are so great. He was a well-known tailor in the 80s and 90s who reworked traditional luxury brand logos from Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Fendi, and MCM into made-to-order pieces. Many of these companies sued him for what he was doing and effectively shut him down. And this seemed to be Gucci making amends, to try and help revive the company they helped shut down.
Black people say, man, don't do nothing with Gucci, don't partner with Gucci. I grew up in the 60s. What I've learned watching the civil rights movement of the 60s, that the most important thing that a person of color can do is to get inside, to have a seat at the table. That is the most important reason for me taking that deal. The Gucci deal involved that they would set me up, make it possible for me to work the same way I worked when I initially started out 30 years ago. But the only difference this time, I would be working with only Gucci fabrication. We would do a joint project together, a joint collection together, and that would go global. It was the ideal situation. It made all the sense in the world to me.
Dapper Dan's partnership with Gucci allowed him to open his own atelier in 2017 and gave him the opportunity to create his own work using raw materials supplied by Gucci. And it was around that time that Alessandro Michele came to the realization that when you're in charge of a company like Gucci, you have a responsibility to learn, connect with people, and the world around you. And that lesson hit him square in the face in 2018 when Alessandro Michele sent models down his runway in wool balaclavas that resembled blackface. The sweater had already been on shelves for about 3 months before the world took notice, but when they did, the company was sent in a tailspin. The sweater with its rolled-up, big red lip collar received many complaints. Dapper Dan called them out, as did others who called for a boycott of Gucci. Others threatened to burn their Gucci merchandise, and Michele and Gucci both issued apologies. But unlike so many other designers, they didn't want to just apologize and move on. They were ready to listen to the larger issue at hand, the lack of diversity, not only in their design teams but in the industry. Alessandro Michele recalled how in his 25-year career in fashion, He could count on his fingers the number of designers of color he had worked with him saying, at the end, I see everything more clearly, but I ignored something that needed visibility. I was more shocked by the fact that we were so ignorant. Gucci CEO Marco Bizzarri apologized for not knowing what blackface was, saying, it was easy for me to say, okay, who made the mistake? I'm going to fire you to save my face. But if we made a mistake, I was the person who made the mistake. Further saying, everyone wanted to know how it happened, how the sweater even reached the marketplace. But Marco Bizzarri wasn't concerned with conducting an investigation. He didn't care who did it. He knew at the end of the day the final say in terms of the designs came down to him. This wasn't about criticizing or firing anyone. It was to have a conversation and to not point fingers. Michele learned a lesson the hard way, but his adamancy to inclusion has led to some great works by Gucci. In 2020, during COVID, he launched Gucci Fest, a 7-day mini-series called Overture of Something That Never Ended, where he screened the collections of 15 emerging designers who placed an emphasis on sustainability or gender neutrality. And in 2021, Gucci celebrated their centenary. And if you have watched all of these videos, you know just how far Gucci has come since 1921. For the centenary, Alessandro Michele debuted his Aria collection, which was a heist of Balenciaga. The 15-minute film featured a soundtrack of songs that all included the word Gucci. The collection was a strong nod to Gucci's equestrian history, as well as a nod to Tom Ford, with Michele recreating his iconic red velvet jumpsuit and Tom Ford's YSL Spring 2003 collection, where he debuted a necklace of a giant anatomical heart. And while the collection featured silhouettes from Demna's Balenciaga collections, Alessandro Michele had his own twist on the silhouettes. They did their best to surprise the audience and play on the biggest sacrilege, blending distinctive elements and logos from two recognizable brands. And since then, many other houses have collaborated, including Fendi and Versace. And in November 2021, Gucci launched the Gucci Love Parade in LA, which was based on Alessandro Michele's Hollywood fairy tale, stories his mother told him of her times in the film industry, like the alabaster paleness of Marilyn Monroe, the black satin gloves of Rita Hayworth, and Veronica Lake's velvet hair, the lavish stories that piqued his interest as a child. And that was why the next chapter of his career at Gucci was going to be about the glamour of Hollywood. He went as far as to show the collection on Hollywood Boulevard. Each model had a different look. Lipstick blended high into the cheekbones and blotted onto the mouth in pale peach, black, and crimson. And while I actually love the concept, that show was all over the place. Beautiful tributes, yes, like a stunning green jewel-trimmed, low-cut draped dress that was a tribute to Jean Harlow's robe in the 1933 film Dinner at 8. But there were so many things that were just ugly, like Fashion Nova Shein-style knockoffs, like a tribute to Anna May Wong's black long-sleeve dragon dress in the 1934 film Limehouse Blues, and what I believe was a tribute to Carrie in 1973, which I can't even believe they even let that down the runway. Alessandro Michele even reprised Tom Ford's iconic red velvet suit again, this time that Gwyneth Paltrow herself wore to the event. And here's the thing. I love everyone's love for that red suit, but we've got to let it go. We have to. I cannot keep seeing it. I cannot. That collection felt like an absolute waste. A waste of money, a waste of time. And then there was the Resort 2023 pre-spring collection, which was a runway show. So I'm not sure when they decided to stop being creative and reduce less. What is sustainable about dropping 2 shows with 100+ unwearable pieces? The answer is nothing. There is nothing sustainable about that. And then, in what would shockingly become his last collection in spring 2023, Alessandro Michele filled the stage with 68 sets of twins. It was titled Welcome to Twinsburg. It is what I imagine one might experience walking into a rave in the 80s. And I don't think it was because of, in my opinion, these lackluster collections, but only a few months after Michele's show, It was announced that Alessandro Michele would be stepping down from Gucci. It was reported that there had been strong disagreements over the future of the house, which had caused a rift between Michele and Bizzarri. Reports say Bizzarri and Pinault urged Michele to shift Gucci's luxury position, meaning they wanted to go into a more quiet fashion route, like Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli, and Acris. They wanted timeless luxury, despite the fact that Gucci sales were reaching over 11 billion. It almost feels like this was going to happen sooner or later, as other sources went on to say that Michele was told to delegate responsibilities, relinquish power, and create a new design structure that would go against his very hands-on approach to attention to detail. About his departure, Michele wrote, "Here are times when paths part ways because of the different perspectives each one of us may have. Today, an extraordinary journey ends for me, lasting more than 20 years within a company to which I have tirelessly dedicated all my love and creative passion. During this long period, Gucci has been my home, my adopted family. To this extended family, to all the individuals who have looked after and supported it, I send my most sincere thanks, my biggest and most heartfelt embrace. Together with them, I have wished, dreamed, imagined. Without them, none of what I have built would have been possible. To them goes my most sincerest wish. May you continue to cultivate your dreams, the subtle and intangible matter that makes life worth living. May you continue to nourish yourselves with poetic and inclusive imagery, remaining faithful to your values. May you always live by your passions, propelled by the wind of freedom." He really had established his identity with Gucci, liberating people through an era of gender fluidity. He broke the rules, showing the fashion world that kitschy doesn't mean tacky. Kitschy has a place in fashion, especially luxury fashion. And after he bid adieu, Gucci was in a rough position. Again, they had some mere weeks to pull together a collection, which they announced would be produced by the Gucci design team, which felt discombobulated, but based on what the next designer puts out, this collection was actually very Gucci-esque. The last collection before everything took a sharp turn. In January 2023, Gucci announced that Sabato De Sarno would become creative director of Gucci. So who is Sabato De Sarno?
Who is Sabato De Sarno?
Well, he was born in Naples, Italy, and he has been working in fashion for over 20 years. He worked at Prada, Dolce & Gabbana in their women's wear knitwear department, and had spent the last 13 years at Valentino as Pier Paolo Piccolo's right-hand man. He was relatively unknown, but he had the potential to shine. Ultimately, it was said that De Sarno got the job because of his promise to bring a sense of luxury timelessness to his work, rather than seasonal trendiness, with him saying, "I'm the opposite of conceptual. I like real clothes. I like when clothes are desirable for people." He was meant to be Gucci's way of repositioning themselves between fashion and luxury into a more quiet luxury space, again, like Loro Piana or Brunello Cucinelli, and far, far away from Alessandro Michele's maximalism. And at first, I was really excited. Sabato's rebrand was ancora, or again, as in I want more, that his Gucci will leave you wanting more and more.
Something that you love and you still want to love. So when you kiss someone and you enjoy the moment, you say, baciami ancora, no? When you have sex,
Voglia di fare l'amore.
you say ancora, ancora, ancora. I loved the passion behind this word.
His focus became this delicious ox blood red color. I mean, it's one of my favorite colors for a reason. It's so good.
When I opened the jacket bag, I found the red inside like as a lining.
The very shade of red became the core visual through line of the collection.
And here's the thing. I saw the vision. I saw what he was trying to do. But I can also admit that his work was always missing something. And I know I'm not alone in that thought. A lot of people felt the same way. Many weren't convinced by Sabato, and I don't think it's because of the clothes. Because from a design standpoint, those clothes are beautiful. I think what it really came down to was the work not feeling like it had that Gucci soul. And that's the real issue with Sabato's time at Gucci. Sabato even said, "I want to see you wearing Gucci, not Gucci wearing you. I don't want the clothes I make to be about me. I want them to be Gucci. When people choose my clothes, I want them to be able to wear them because to me, it's important to have things that have life." Sabato's work had a very single-minded focus to it. Understated, sophisticated clothing that was so far from the Gucci image that had been created by the enamorous Gucci family and had been cultivated and exploited by Tom Ford in the 90s and Alessandro Michele in the 2010s. Sabato's work was supposed to be quiet. It was made to quiet the critics who questioned the direction he was taking with the house. And it does feel, at least to me, that he was beginning to find his footing at Gucci. But it just wasn't enough, and he made an early exit. His work was supposed to jumpstart sales. Instead, it did the opposite. Throughout 2023, at the time of his first few collections, sales had steadily declined, and by 2024, sales had decreased quarter to quarter. It was obvious that Sabato's work wasn't breaking through to people. His departure was a long time coming. One financial advisor said, Kering has many issues right now, but Gucci is core. If Gucci doesn't perform, Kering will not re-rate, so they must get that right. So it really was no surprise when in February 2025, it was announced that Sabato De Sarno would be leaving Gucci. And very quickly, people began to wonder who would take his place. Who was Gucci going to bring in to rival the legacy of Alessandro Michele? And by March, rumors began swirling. Bad rumors. Until March 13th, when those rumors came true. Gucci had announced that Demna Gvasalia, artistic director of Balenciaga, would be taking the helm of Gucci, replacing Sabato De Sarno. And before I get into all of this, what I really want to know is, what does Demna have over Kering? Does he know something bad about the Pino family? Because this dude can do no wrong in their book. He is their John Galliano. And I'm not even talking about the whole Balenciaga debacle, which I did try to understand that whole thing, but for the life of me, I still don't know what that was. It's a video for another day, that's for sure. All I know is that I think with all the bad press, they should have let him go. And they didn't. Instead, they moved him to Gucci. And this is something that bugs me so much about the fashion industry, and it's something they need to understand. It is okay to let people go. Stop trying to move the same designer to different houses and expect different results. Beyond that, it is always the same, like 7 or 8 white male designers being rotated around. We can't try something new? We can't try someone new? As of this video, he did just tease or drop his spring 2026 collection called La Familia, which has been said to be a reinterpretation of the house's codes through a family, a makeshift Gucci family. So we have
Incasata, Direttore, La VIP, Pesantone, Ereditiera, Nerd, Milanesa, Narcisista, Gallerista, Introverso, Shura, Ragazzo dalla Porto accanto, La Cattiva, Coco di Mama, La VIC, Figo, Ragazza, Principino, Le Influencer, Androgino, La Bomba, Party Boy, La Bomba numero 2, Rubacuore, Miss Aperitivo, It Girl, Bastardo, La Drama Queen, Ragazzo, La Principessa, La Snob, Prima Donna, La Diva, Flora, La Contessa, La Mecinate, La Star.
It was extravagant. It was La Dolce Vita. It was the Gucci family and their exuberant, unapologetic attitude. And I loved it. And do you know why I loved it? Because I've been sitting on this for a few days, trying to figure out why I love it so much. And I think in so many ways, it's because it reminds me of Tom Ford's Gucci work, Alessandro Michele's Gucci work, and the codes and structures Demna made his signature at Balenciaga. I've seen these belts, these shoes and accessories before. We all have. And I know I'm being a harsh critic, but this isn't even a critique about Demna, because I know it's hard to not see Tom Ford and Alessandro Michele's touch when they have had such a heavy hand in establishing Gucci's distinct codes. But my issue is actually with Gucci, or Kering, because they ruined a beautiful thing with Michele by letting him go, and trying to abruptly shift the house of Gucci into a new and strikingly different direction. They had a vast list of clientele, steady and increasing sales under Michele, going from a maximalist Italian house, which it's always been, to a minimalist quiet luxury house was stupid. They lost so much money and good standing within the fashion world that they had to go back to exactly what Tom Ford and Michele were doing at Gucci before. Kering is an absolute mess. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Yes, I disliked his last few collections, but that doesn't mean everyone else wasn't loving it. Sales were up under him. It's just that one day Gucci up and decided that they wanted to rebrand, to change their image, to relate to the growing trend of quiet luxury, a trend that is so ridiculously anti-Gucci, and it's not shocking that they tanked. And here's the thing, there is no such thing as a silent luxury trend. Silent luxury has always existed and will continue to exist long after this. Very rich people aren't like us. Simply put, they will spend thousands on a beige cashmere sweater if it means they don't look like the rest of us. And the other thing I want to make a note on is that everything that happened at Gucci is tragic. Because I love Gucci. But it's not shocking. Just look at their other brands, specifically Alexander McQueen under Sean McGurr, which I won't be talking about here, but basically Kering takes a really good and steady thing, like Tom Ford, Sarah Burton, Alessandro Michele, and they ruin it by trying to drastically make changes. They have no idea what they're doing, and it shows. It is evident in every random decision they've made in the last few years. And if they are going to continue to act in their own interest instead of the customer's interest, then why even bother putting out collections? Just ask your customers to come into the store, hand the employees their money, and leave, if that is all you care about, because money is all they seem to care about. All right. So, I'm not really sure how I got here, but I guess I'm feeling very passionate and annoyed. Sorry. I do think that is all I have for y'all today. I think this might be where we leave each other. Gucci is done. I almost can't believe it. This house has been hanging over me for years and has felt very impossible from start to finish, but here we are. Nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. I really do hope you enjoyed this series. Maybe you loved it. I don't know. As always, though, I've linked all of my resources. There are a lot of them. There is a bit of information that I've left out because I couldn't fit it into the storyline, and also because it would probably require me to make like 7 or 8 videos. I'm not even kidding. But definitely look into them if you're interested in learning more. And as always, please let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. But with that, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day or night, and I will see you all in February, hopefully. It might be March. But either way, I'm always working on another video, I promise. And see.